All right, so you're halfway there. So the way the class kind of runs, it kind of starts off hard. Week one, week two, a little more laid back. Go ahead and animate your stuff, and then week three gets a little rougher. Not work wise, as far as um, like sitting in front of your computer for hours on end trying to figure something out. It's more of just the render times. It's probably what I can't stress this enough, how long it takes to render, and you can't wait until Saturday night to start rendering your stuff. So it's something you're going to want to do kind of early, preferably by Thursday. You have all your stuff rendered. The setup's pretty easy. I have everything pretty much kind of set up for you. You have to go ahead and do all your passes and everything. But my campus class today, I took all the problems they had and threw them into a little keynote thing, so I can kind of run through some stuff you might run into. There were some weird ones, but most of it is like bugs with like how RenderMan and Maya kind of work together, but not really. They coexist, I guess. But yeah, so what I will do is let me just kind of step through this. Um, as far as like all your rigs and stuff and all your animations, for the most part, everybody was in pretty good shape. There were a couple people that are a little rough, um, may have an issue when it comes to like doing the final renders and stuff. I mean, the renders will be fine, but your animation's a little rough. But the idea behind it is to get you in and using stuff, like getting in and learning how the rigs work and things like that. I'm not super critical unless the rig is completely destroyed and it doesn't work at all, which I had a couple of those turn in. I couldn't scale it. I couldn't animate. If I tried to animate it, like half of the stuff wouldn't move. So that's kind of a problem. It's not a deal breaker as far as doing renders and stuff. But your animation's not going to look that great. Um, so yeah. So let me kind of. I'll hold off on that stuff till the end. If people have questions about the last couple weeks about anything, because I did the majority of the grades. I didn't get through. I'm only about a third of the way through section two. So I have about 10 people left to do. Um, and that's what I get for putting off the rig grades so people have time to kind of get stuff in. And then now I have 80 projects to grade in one day, and that was rough. I was here till I did a 13-hour day yesterday doing grades, so so it was kind of rough. And I'll be doing them tomorrow. I get a break. I don't have my normal meetings tomorrow. I have a free day tomorrow, so I'm going to run through and finish those up tomorrow. So I'll get all the grades all caught up as of week two, and then you'll be good to go for the rest of it. So yeah, no kidding. I'm not sure how you say your name. Dashika? I don't know. But yeah, it was a fun day. I was in the conference room. I just took over the projector and had three screens going and had spreadsheet on one, Maya on one, and FSO on one. Away I went, doing grades. All right, so this week is going to be rendering. So you're going to take a scene you made. As long as you have everything set up correctly, you will go ahead and set up all your render passes and or your AOVs, I should say, and you will go through and render out all the passes and render it out so that we can, at the end of the week, take everything into Nuke and layer it over the backplate. So I have some rendering things I need to go over with you because that was all we were doing on campus today. They do their Nuke stuff on Thursday. Um, but I want to kind of hit you with some of this. Nuke itself, I'll kind of run through it again. The Nuke part is actually, it sounds complicated, but honestly, your script is going to be very small. But it just kind of gets you in and understanding how Nuke functions, how to do basic layering, and how to read stuff in, write stuff out, how the interface works. It's kind of what the Nuke part's for. That's why I kept this really simple. Um, I didn't try throwing green screens at you and heavy key stuff and doing matte paintings and everything because I have whole months of just that, and students have trouble getting it done. So I'm not going to throw that at you right off the bat. All right, so I think I'm gonna pop this up. You guys don't? Can you see it? I get a little nervous. Sometimes Keynote freaks out a little bit whenever I go full screen. If anybody says you can see it, I have the audio off, so you have to type it in the chat if you can see it. All right. So fun with rendering. So some things to watch out for. Here's just a little line list real quick of things you got to watch out for whenever you're doing this part of it. First is your render times. Your render times are going to be long. This is no joke. You're looking at 4 to 8 hours, depending on what kind of setup you did in your renders. So this is why I say you can't wait till Saturday to kick these things off. You're looking at like anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute a frame, and you have 238 of them. So do the math on that. Um, I've had people go as high. I have one I'll show you today. It was actually 3 minutes a frame and it ran all night. It was about 10 hours. And I rendered it with motion blur and all that stuff. So this is no joke. Render times will bite you. And if I get somebody emailing me that their renders are, they just started rendering on Sunday, it's points off because I've warned from day one about this. Uh, V-Ray will take just as long, if not longer. RenderMan is pretty quick. It's faster than Mental Ray was. The Mental Ray version of this, it was 3 to 4 minutes a frame. To render out the whole sequence was like 16 hours. So yeah, um, um, I just don't want people waiting until like Sunday to do this because all of a sudden now you're hoping your renders get done, and then you still have to do the comp after that. Yeah, if you're using a work rig, if you got like 32 cores and 128 gigs of RAM and SSD drives and yeah, and a good GPU, yeah, you could render this whole thing out in like 8 seconds. But yeah, so see, there you go. So you're not going to have an issue. So you can wait till Sunday if you want to. So yeah, the next one you're going to run into is texture files. I'm going to step through all of these. And then you're going to have some issues with the holdouts that may or may not be an issue, and some batch rendering settings that apparently I have stuff that I set and then I forget that I've set it. And I've had RenderMan for a couple of years now that I use pretty steady. And I have a lot of settings in Maya that have already been set. Once they're set, I don't ever have to go back and do them again. So they're actually in the setup. So I'll show you a couple of those as well that may help speed you up a little bit. So render times can be long. Don't wait until the last minute. Do test renders. You can test render one frame and take it into Nuke if you want. You can jump right ahead, not even render your entire sequence out yet. And you can go into Nuke and load everything up and just bring in the one frame. Just know what frame you were on so you can move the timeline to that frame. And you can do your comp right there with one frame. And then what you do is, you'll see this whenever you're in Nuke, you can actually just delete the read node for that one frame of render and then create a new read node with the entire frame range and drop it in. And then the comp will still work exactly fine. You just plug it in where the old one was. It's pretty cool. That's the advantage of node-based compositing. Um, but do test renders. You'd be surprised how many people I have that just batch render. Okay, batch render, and they don't even know what it looks like. And they'll wait the 4 hours or 6 hours or whatever, and then it gets down. They're like, I don't understand, and it doesn't look right. And I'm like, did it look right in the test renders? No, I didn't do that. I'm like, well, you should. So don't wait. Test render it. Take it in a new play with it. Open it up. Bust out the AOVs. Have a look at all of them. Make sure everything's kosher. Um, do a test batch render as well. This will show if there's any weird setup issue you're going to have when you write things out. When you do a test batch render, what you do is you just set your frame range to something small, like 1 frame or 5 frames, just something really quick. I'm going to show you a setting where it actually renders 5 frames at a time. So one render process will produce 5 images in sequence. And it's basically where RenderMan uses the Maya batch process and it just tells it to render 5 frames. And so you can do it that way just to make sure that your RenderMan's going to like actually do the batch render. I had somebody today, they kept trying to kick off their batch render and it would just abort. It was an abort mission. Don't know what's wrong. Turned out to be a licensing issue, but still, you want to test it, make sure everything works. Also, that will allow you to see how long it takes a frame to give you an idea how long it's going to be before the entire render is done. So you can just do the math on it. Your frames are all roughly about the same. It'll be about the same processing time per frame. So it's not going to be anything drastic. It's not like you're flying in and then the entire thing is completely CG. Obviously your render times would change. But most of the time, the robot arm's roughly about the same distance away. It's not taking up any more screen space from one frame to the next for the most part. Nothing dramatic. And so once you get a few frames rendered, you'll have a rough idea about how close you'll be, give or take maybe 10 minutes or so. Just multiply your time per frame by how many frames you need to do, and that'll give you a pretty good idea. If you can keep your render times under a minute, it's 238 frames. That keeps you down in the 2 hour range or maybe 3 hour range. But in general, it's about 4 hours roughly on average. All right. Again, if you have a killer machine at home, there's at least one person so far migrating who uses a PC because they had an AVI play blast, which threw me off for a second. I had to open VLC to do it on my Mac, but I am PC. I have a PC sitting over here to my left, a 6-core machine that I use to do my renders on. So yeah, my renders go a little quicker over there. And it's a PC, so I play blast in AVIs, or I just play blast sequences and do everything in Premiere. Yeah, render times, I just can't stress it enough. Make sure you don't wait till the last minute to start rendering. All right. There is a shader issue, and it's a RenderMan issue. Normally, with any other renderer, Arnold, the Maya software renderer, even Mental Ray when it was part of Maya, any texture that you brought in would automatically, if it didn't find it, because if you go look at the shader right now in the hypershade, and you go look, there's two shaders, one called base and one called detail. Base is the one that is all the metal parts, where it's painted, so it's like the white part, and then the chrome parts, which is on the gripper and that little motor on the back, is the detail. It's a separate UV space. They show up fine in the 3D view because Maya is actually doing the file lookup. What Maya does is, if it looks at the image name and it doesn't find the file at that location, it jumps through the paths. And so first it will look in your source images, then it will look in where the scene file was opened, and then it'll look in your Maya paths. If it doesn't find it anywhere in there, then it brings back a black texture and it gives you an error saying the file can't load. When you're looking at it in the 3D view, like you've been doing so far, your textures are showing up because Maya is defaulting to your source images where the files are. However, when I exported the file, for some reason it hard coded in my source images, and so rather than just do source images / and then the file name, it put the entire path. So you see the entire path of my Dropbox. So I have Dropbox because I have multiple machines, both here and at work. And so I can have machines here and machines at work all rendering, and they all go to the same folder. So if it renders here, it goes into Dropbox, and they show up at work on my machine. And so I just pull in all my renders, and when it's done here, it's done there. And I don't have to come home and grab the files or anything. They're just there. So whenever I was doing like class setup and all this stuff and all my demos, and whenever I set this up, it was on my Dropbox project file. Well, RenderMan ignores that. Like RenderMan is its own thing, so it runs external to Maya, so it doesn't know. It should know. I don't know why it doesn't, but it doesn't know the source images and all that stuff. So when it doesn't find the file and the path that's showing up in the file node, it's going to it was weird, and it took me a little while to figure this out because Maya was showing the textures. They were there. But RenderMan, once it launches its external process, the external process doesn't know where to find the images. It's trying to go to my Dropbox, and you guys don't have my Dropbox. And so your renders will render with no textures on. You'll have everything will look like this weird kind of glossy gold look. And it's basically just a default diffuse, which is kind of a brownish color, and the default specular, and everything will have the same color. So all you have to do is go into the file. There's 6 of them. If you grab the 2 materials and just graph them in the hypergraph, just go to every file node and take everything out before source images. So it'll say like what it says right here. You'll have source images, whatever, but there's this giant path that's going out here that's my Dropbox. So it's like C:, users, J Brandovas, Dropbox, projects, portfolio 3, source images, So just start before S, select everything before that, delete it, and hit enter. And RenderMan will now find the file texture because it'll be right where you're pointing at. And just do that with every file node, and you'll be fine. All right. I can show you real quick just where that's at because it's on mine. Let me and I actually have Maya open right now. And so let me just reopen the scene. So let me just open a different scene here. If I go to, I'll just go to Rig Final. So this was my final rig whenever I was making the videos for you guys, and I just keep opening this one because yeah, save it. And if I in my hardware view, I see that I have the texture. It's obviously there. There's a texture on there. Um, but if I go to the hypershade, now on my machine it'll work. Like if I hit render, it'll render fine. But if I go grab, you have a base and you have a detail. So both of these shaders. If you select them both, just select one and shift select the other one. Then hit the graph button down here. You should remember this from shading and lighting. It'll graph out both materials for you. All these nodes, all 6 of these nodes right here, these are all the file nodes. Right? Oops, sorry. This one is the file node for this because this is the. I did one as a bump, one as a Pixar normal map. You may find the bump actually works better, and if you want to replace this with the bump version, that's fine. It's totally cool. But as you go through, if I select, you'll notice that it has the file, but if I start going backwards, it's my entire Dropbox. And so on yours, RenderMan is going to try and go here. And obviously you don't have that. So to fix this, all you have to do is just go to where it has source images, start at the beginning of source images, and select everything forward, hit backspace, and hit it. All right. And so now, and then when you save it, it should save like this. And so worst case is it saves it pointing to your source images folder. But this is how it should open up. You just do that with every file. So go to every file node, just select the beginning of source images, go to the beginning, delete it. So it's just source images / and the file name, and you're good. This is what's known as a reference, opening by reference. When you have the full path, that's opening absolute. Absolute means it has to be in that spot or it can't find it. Reference means it is whatever the project currently is set to, source images / whatever. I can also just take that out and just put the file name, and it'll find it that way as well, or it should. RenderMan might not, but when you do it this way, RenderMan will find it. Okay, and just do that with every one of them. Select it. As soon as you select the node, you'll see the slash right in front of source image. Just click there, drag backwards, and backspace, or delete, I should say. Sorry, PC guy, it's backspace to me. Yeah, you should do that with all of them. The Pixar normal map, it'll be here. So you have to go here. You'll have to actually go and point to this one. So you'll have to go to your source images and do it that way. And it's always the OG version. Just make sure you're on the right shader. This is the detail, I believe, bottom one. Yeah. So I want the detail normal. So detail normal OG. It stands for OpenGL. It tells whether it's flipped or not. So if you look at the normal map, if you're ever confused about that on normal maps, OpenGL is oriented this way. If I select the DX version, which is DirectX, notice how it flips this way. The orientation is different. So the normals go backwards. So that's what the DirectX does. It inverts the normals. All right, but RenderMan uses the OpenGL version. So do OG. And just say OK. And then that'll remap the file there. All right. Same thing with roughness. Go back to the beginning of where source images starts, and then just select, click, and drag backwards. Now I'll fix all your shaders. So if you get renders that have no color on them, that's what the problem is. Just go and resource your file names. Alrighty. Let's see. Yeah. So all right. So that's what all that is. Holdouts. So there's a video where I talk about creating a holdout. What a holdout allows you to do is create the shadows that need to land on the live action stuff. So you're putting your arm on a table, and it's going on. The CG is going to be there that goes over it, but then also the CG needs to cast a shadow onto the live action. And so what you'll need to do is you'll have to model for the live action. Now, when I show the holdout, I just do the tabletop. But if your arm, some of you guys have some animation where your arm really kind of stretches over some of the stuff on the table. If you want the shadows to show up on those objects, you will need that shadow to appear over the object itself. So all you have to do is model the object, make sure it matches the motion of the live action object, and then you'll do that same holdout onto the geo so that it cuts out and captures the shadow. Now the trick with this is
when you do the holdout, let me see. Let me open my render back up. So file. Oops, wrong one. Hang on a second. Somebody sent me a message here. Hang on, just typing something real quick. Okay. Let's see. So, where was I? Oh, let me go open that file. Recent files. I'll go grab that render. Whoops. All right, so this already has a holdout. And I have I was showing them in class how this worked, but I'll show you guys. What happens right now is if I render this, well, I think I saw renders open from earlier. I do. And what's going on here? Yeah, I'll do this one. Oh, I was testing something else. Oh, here it is. And so if I look at my alpha channel for this, what I've got is I put a piece of geo in here, and this is the alpha that shows where the shadow is going to land. But let me show you what happens if you don't do it this way. So I need to. Sorry, I was at 1920 earlier, so I need to reduce the size of my stuff here. Oh my gosh. Yeah, our projectors are laser projectors at the campus, and I actually run 1920 by 1080, and so none of my stuff fits now whenever I go in here. Right. So I'm going to board this color, and let me just make a new object here so I can show you what happens. So I'll create some interesting helix, scale it up, just so you can see what happens here. Just make it something kind of decent here. That's a little too big. And oh, this go-to thing just gets in the way. And go down to the helix. I can go ahead and make it taller. That little thing's there. I'm going to delete it. So above, and we just add some subdivisions. Yeah, it's smaller. So if I render it right now, I will get the helix. All right, let's say there's a helix sitting on the table. So when I render this, I get this over the top. So I get the helix. So what I can do is I can go in, and if I look at the alpha, it's solid white. Right? If I go in, I can actually select this guy. And the way you do the holdout is you just assign a shader, which I have one here called, it's just a holdout, pixel holdout. And you can just take that shader and drop it on there. If I get all this stuff out of the way. So I just take this guy, drop it right there. And so now the holdout's on there. All right. So the holdout's on there, and then what I have to do is I have to select it and hit the holdout button. So you have to hit this, and watch what happens when I do. I hit that, and now whenever I deselect, you can't see it's there, but it is there. I could select it. And so what happens now is when I render, it'll do the render. You won't see, you'll see the arm. Oop, oh gee, look at this. I was supposed to surprise you. You don't see the actual helix or anything. Well, you will a little bit, and that's because of the Pixar surface shader. If you don't want it to show up at all, which you don't, not in the color view, what you got to do is you have to go to the shader and set the color to black, the diffuse color to black, so it doesn't show up here. But when I look at the alpha channel, you notice I see the helix. But notice I'm getting a lot of bright white here. What this is doing is it creates the holdout. It makes the color channels invisible. The alpha is not there, but and it receives shadows, but it is also casting shadows. So if you need to do a holdout for something that's already in the shot, so if I go over here and my nuke, I have nuke open right now. Something else I was doing.
Like, this bowl, there's a little shadow on it, or there's this little contact shadow here. But if I need this shadow to actually show up and kind of go over the lip of this guy, or I need it to show up like on the side of the bottle, I need to model the bottle to catch the shadow, but I don't want my model of the bottle to create another shadow, which is what I call a double shadow. Because the shadow already exists in live action, I don't want a second dark shadow to go over the top of that. So I'm only wanting to capture the additional shadow of adding the CG object in. So you just model that, and that's what happens there. So right now my helix is actually casting a shadow, which is here. So my helix is casting a shadow. So if I don't want that shadow to be cast by the helix, all I got to do is go to the helix itself, and there's Maya. You just go to the helix itself with it selected, go to your attribute editor, and you do not want that object to cast any shadows. You only want it to receive shadows. You only want to see shadows that are being created by the other CG. So I'll turn off cast shadows. So now when I render it, what will happen is when it generates the alpha, which is what I think I'm looking at right now, notice how I don't get the cast shadow underneath, but I am receiving the shadow over the top of the CG object. So you want a CG object that matches um, uh, your live action. And I've made this as simple as possible for you. The majority of anything you might need to cast a shadow on is um, is flat on the table. So it's probably like the lid or the bottle, or some of you guys are going over the top of this guy, maybe the paper towel thing. Um, all of these things go right down to the table, and there's trackers all over the place. You can pick any one of these trackers and then just kind of figure out, move it in X and Z to kind of move it to where you need it to be. And just don't lift it off the plane. I had some people do that earlier, and they didn't understand what was going on. You have to keep it on the ground plane. So anything you model, just keep it flat on the plane and only move it in X and Z. Don't lift it up. All right. So like my scene's kind of wrecked right now because of what I was doing with my renders, but um, it's pretty straightforward. You just have to don't trust just one camera view. Like if I modeled this thing and I moved it over and say, oh, it looks perfect. Make sure you like move it to the other side and look at it from a different camera view. You may not be as perfectly placed as you think you are. All right, and you can just go back and forth, and you'll figure out like how far is it moving. Like maybe you're off like a fraction, move it halfway back, and stuff like that. So and that's only if you want to. I'm not saying you guys have to sit and model all this stuff out. I had a few people do it. Don't really have to, but it is a good exercise if you ever want to model for film. This is a common thing modelers do: is they'll get a live action plate with reference images and stuff, and they'll have to model the stuff for just for purposes like this. It needs to catch reflections. It needs to catch shadows. Maybe they're using it for an alpha to cut something out. Maybe there's CG going behind it. They need a model to cut out so that the CG can go around it. They do a holdout on it so that the CG model can go behind things. That kind of stuff is done. It's a good exercise. Not required. I'm not going to require you to do it. But I may say something like, like some of you guys were really close to some of the other stuff, and this little dark shadow that's being generated from my render right here is, it won't look right if it's just bleeding across. So you'd need the bottle there to like create that little warp where the shadow kind of hits and goes around and things like that. Shadow can see if anybody said anything. Oh, not a thing. Must be doing well. All right. So be thinking of that type of stuff. Just remember, if you do anything other than table, if you need to put the bottle up here, go ahead and make a model of it so you can capture the shadow that hits the bottle. All right. Let's see what else we got here. I think the only other thing is, when you do your batch render, make sure you do set your frame range in the render settings. By default, it's not set. I think I forgot to touch on that on the video. I'm in such a habit of every animation I ever do, I go set my frame rate. This one, yes, the camera's tracked and everything, but the actual render frames aren't set. So if I go look, they're set now because I did do it. But if I go in here, you need to make sure that you have, because it'll be set to current frame and nothing will be, like you'll batch render and only one frame will come out. And that's what happened to me today because I forgot to do it. I set up a new scene, totally forgot to do it right in front of the class. Hit batch render, I'm sitting back, I'm waiting for it to finish, and I'm like, how is it done already? And it only rendered one frame. So you have to set it to animation, and then however many frames you need. 1 to 238 is the sequence. If you're trimming off the end, you can go
well, 1 to 230 if you want, because I hit the button at the end and it made the whole frame jump. So if you don't want that, you can trim that off, or just render it all out and then manually trim it yourself at the end. Well, I'll show you how to do all that in Premiere, how to trim stuff off and things like that. So make sure that's set. Make sure these frames are going to the right spot. Let's see if I missed anything here. So make sure you set your frame range. Make sure you hide the screen when you render. You don't want the image plane in there. So select it, hide it, throw it on a layer, make it non-visible, delete it. You don't need it. You don't want to render with the backplate in there. Matter of fact, the RenderMan won't render it with the backplate in there. It'll freak out and mess up. All right. And finally, when you bash, oh, I forgot one thing. When you're doing the AOVs are here, and I have a whole video on how to set this up. So this is where you get your diffuse and your specular and indirect specular and albedo. I threw a depth channel in here on this particular one, alpha channel, all that. These all render as separate images inside of an EXR. If you go to the workspace, you can go in and change these. These are all just variables. If you right click, you can insert any of these variables you want. But you'll notice AOV is here. If you delete this out, if you delete this, when it renders, like if you do a test render, you will not get the AOVs in the viewer here, like here. If I go in here and look at this I do the twirl down and I have all these. These are all my AOVs, so diffuse and specular and indirect specular and all that. These won't show up when you do the render. And what will happen is when you batch render, you will get a separate image with the name of the AOV, and you'll get 6 images for the same render. And so if you want all the images to show up in one EXR file, which is what happens here, if I go view my render, which is right here, up here is where my channels are, and so I can go and I can look at direct diffuse, and I can go look at the reflections, and I can look at the albedo, all that stuff is in here. If I don't have that AOV in there, what happens is I have to do a separate read node for every single one of those because they're going to be separate image files. All right, so you don't really want that. You want them all to be in one EXR. It makes it easier to transport your stuff around and things like that. Yeah, that's about it as far as things to look for. So the last thing, I feel like I forgot something. Oh, on your batch render. So if you've just installed RenderMan and you do a batch render, you'll notice when I do my batch render, I talk about how it has 50 processes. As a matter of fact, my batch render is still open here from earlier because I paused it. I'll have 50 because my batch render, when I do it, what it does is it launches a Maya batch process. And the Maya batch, it tells the Maya batch to render 5 frames and finish. And so it just does this 5 frames at a time. So 5 times 50 is 250. I have 238 frames. So the last batch doesn't render all the frames. So, yeah, so you'll notice down here, these are all my renders. And the reason it goes up to 50, it only does 48. But the reason it goes to 50 is there's 2 things here for the output, which is something with the rib files, and it's got a JSON thing. So it's got these 2 things that happen really fast at the end. So it's actually 48 things that it's doing. Times 5 comes out to 230 some odd frames. Okay. But to get this to work this way, if you don't do it this way, what will happen is you'll get 240 processes that it has to do. And it processes one and finishes, starts over, processes another one. If you want it to Maya batch on your mental ray, what you want to do is go to Windows, Settings Preferences, and go to your Preferences. And there, when you have RenderMan installed, there is a RenderMan section here. All right. And in the RenderMan section, the first is render to Pixar IT or my render view. This is why when you hit render, like here, it opens up the Pixar IT window, or image tool, is what it stands for. And then that's for an IPR render. And then for a batch render, yours will be set to RIB and spool to local queue. And so what will happen is it will go through, and on the local queue, it will spool a RIB file, and then it will
uh, do the render man render one frame at a time. So it'll spool a rib file and then render off the rib file. It'll do that one right after another. But if you change the spool style to Maya batch, what it will do is it'll say frames per server, and what it'll do is it'll create a process with a Maya batch. It'll say render these 5 frames. It'll say frames 1 to 5, and then when it's done, then it'll say do 6 to 10, and then it'll do 11 to 15, and it just does those 5 frames at a time until it hits the end. All right. I found this is faster because it doesn't have to stop and go, stop and go, stop and go. So like individual frames may not look like much. Like, oh, it's only 5 seconds longer to do it the other way. Well, 5 seconds longer times 238, you just added however many minutes that is. 5 seconds times 238 frames. Well, that's 1,000 seconds, and whatever that comes out to, that's how much render time you've added. So I set mine to Maya batch. It's just quicker. Um, and you get the little Maya batch thing bouncing down here at the bottom. Um, but I'm not going to let it go because my whole GoTo will go insane because all my cores will take off and you won't be able to hear me or anything. But yeah, those are the big things you're going to run into this week. Um, and yeah, just kind of keep your eye out for that stuff. Okay. Other than that, does anybody have any questions or anything? I can unmute if people would rather talk in chat. Let's see who's got loud kids or barking dogs or whatever. Everybody on. I got nothing. I don't have anything. Isaac's the only one with his mic that's actually on. Everybody else, I think, is self-muted. Anybody have any questions or anything?
If I don't want to model the objects in order for the shadows to pass over it, does that mean that I have to kind of reanimate my arm if it has it swinging over some of those objects?
Honestly, the way the scene is set up, um, as long as you don't have the arm get really close to the ground, um, it's probably fine. Because it's far enough away, the shadow is so subtle that it you're not going to notice it either way. I mean, you can get really like I can get really nitpicky and like zoom in and be like, oh, there should be a shadow there, or maybe there is a shadow, but it's not actually going over the object; it's just kind of there. But I'm not going to be that nuts about it. But when you get to CSF and stuff, you're going to have to like be conscious of that type of stuff because that's where you get into more production level type comps. You're going to be doing your own tracking, and you're going to be putting all your CG objects in yourself. And if you want to do compositing, they encourage you to do the old project that we used to do whenever I was in CSF, and it's there's a guy and you track his head and you put a CG helmet. We give you the helmet with all the shaders and everything on it, and you have to do the shadows under the helmet onto the live action, and you have to do all your passes, and you have to layer it over the plate. There's a bunch of grain in the shot, so you have to do film grain. All that type of stuff is going to be in there. So um, the Sentai videos, I'll have to check with Juan to see where those are at. I got to see if he's got them on a YouTube playlist or not. If he's got them, I'll email them over to you. But yeah, it's not super necessary as long as this isn't really close to anything like the base. Like if the base is like right up against something that's live, that's really there, or in the live action plate, you kind of need a little bit of a shadow to be cast on that object. So you might need like that one object, but you don't have to sit and model everything that may or may not get a shadow. So it doesn't hurt to like kind of see like step through your animation and like render out certain frames where it might be a little close and just see what it does and see where your shadows fall. But it's not a game ender. If you have a little bit of a shadow that kind of doesn't follow the shape of the object. Let's see. Joseph, what are my playblast settings? When you, I have the playblast video up there, right? Where how to do a proper playblast to the correct resolution. You go to Windows Playblast, and what you want is you want I do H.264 for my playblast just because the files are smaller. I could do photo JPEG, but they make it larger. because it's doing JPEG compression, and you can go and set your quality, so your JPEG quality or whatever. But those tend to be larger, and you get JPEG artifacts. So I'm not a big fan of that. I'd rather just do H.264. It's smaller, easier to kind of work with. It kind of works with everything. But your display size needs to be from render settings, and your scale needs to be 1. Frame padding doesn't matter because you're doing the AV foundation, so it's writing a movie file, and so then you just give it a name, and it'll make it a .mov by default because of the H.264. And what that'll do is when you play Blast, even though it'll be tiny in this view, it'll actually write the file at full 1080 because it's going through the GPU to generate it. So it's letting you see it down here, but it's not actually rendering it that size. And I had several people do their Play Blasts that were like the size of this window, like this big. That's all the bigger it was. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it was so anti-aliased I couldn't even hardly see the controls. They're so aliased, I should say. So you got to remember, you're kind of wanting to use this as your uh, uh, part of your breakdown at the end. So next week we'll be going into Premiere and we'll be dropping in all of our play blasts, all of our renders, and the footage and all that stuff, and kind of creating a breakdown and kind of showing a progression. So you show the shot, then you show the footage, then you show the wireframes of the play blast, maybe show off the rig a little bit, and then show the contact sheet, and then the shot again, and put some title cards in there with some text, and, kind of make a demo reel out of it. And if you have a video that's like this and you start dropping stuff in, well, now you got this little video in the middle with a big black border around it, and you're having to transform it. Now you have this one video that's like all fuzzy and looks kind of out of place, and then you got this crisp render that looks photoreal, and then it goes back to crappy wireframe again. You don't want that. You want your wireframes and your renders to kind of be clean. Go Google up some breakdown videos of CG shots, and you'll see them do wipes to wireframes that are rendered almost as photoreal as the actual shot itself. And they'll put the wires over the live action, so they'll put a wireframe over the top of the rendered CG just to kind of show what the wires look like and what's CG and what's real, that kinds of stuff. So I do know you say your animation seems to be playing fast. Some people never change their animation speed. I know at least 2 other people have the wrong playback speed. However, it doesn't matter a lot in the grand scheme in this particular case because you have a track camera that has 238 frames. What's happening is Maya, the frame rate, like mine right now, is set to 30 frames. When I do my play blast, they actually do look a little fast. What will happen is whenever I do um, the final video at the end, I'll actually be set up at 24 frames a second. And so even though this is 30 frames a second, when I drop it in, it'll play it back at 24. So it'll be 24 frames a second on the video. And when you're rendering out of Maya, I could set this to 60 frames a second. It doesn't matter. It's still 238 frames. It's just when I make a play blast out of it, it'll play it back at 60 frames a second. Or whatever I plug in here. So they don't. Yeah, so I can go up to 48,000 frames a second, Phantom camera, if I wanted to. But it's only going to spit out frames. So I'll have frames 1 to 238. So when I go into Nuke, I just say, yeah, I'm 24 frames a second. And if I make a video out of Nuke, it'll create the video at 24 frames a second. But I'm going to render out, and I'll render out a Nuke at 24 frames a second. So whenever I drop it into Premiere, Premiere is going to read it as 24 frames a second. So the first thing you'll drop in is your shot, and that'll automatically set Premiere to the parameters of your render, and your render should be 24 frames per second movie file, and that will force Premiere into that mode. And then any other video you drop in after that is forced to that mode, or it will retranslate it to 24 frames a second. So as long as your render renders 238 frames, and you go into Nuke and you write it out of Nuke at 24. And in Nuke, it's just setting your project. You do set and frames per second 24. That's default for Nuke. So you don't even have to do anything in Nuke. All you got to do is bring your stuff in. It's going to write out a 24 frame per second video file and drop it in Premiere, and you're good to go. And you'll have all your Premiere videos next week. Premiere is pretty easy. Once you get into it, it's pretty easy to work with. You'll find that'll be one of the easiest weeks you have, is making the breakdown itself, and you get to see your class from beginning to end. All right. Anybody else have any questions? went longer than I thought it would. I don't know if you're interested. This video is. I was debating showing motion blur. This video has motion blur in it, so if you look, you can see it's kind of blurred because I'm at a frame where it's in motion. So if I look down here, I'm getting motion blur when it comes across. So actually, that's cache. Don't worry about that. It goes away. If I hit the play button, it'll kind of flicker a little bit and then it'll come back. And that's just new caching what's currently visible in the frame. But yeah, I have a motion blur in there. If I show it comped, it is with the comp, like 130, something like that. It's coming across. And I've rendered it with the motion blur and everything in it. So it's a little extreme. I could turn it down. My shutter's a little slow, so it actually kind of blurred it a little too far. But yeah, RenderMan, it's literally a checkbox. You just go to the render settings. Probably seen it before. You get your features, motion blur off, 3D motion blur. That's all you got to do for basic motion blur. If you have anything that's spinning in a circle, you need to turn up motion samples here. Because what it does is, in between frames, blurring the motion from one frame to the next. If you don't turn up the samples, what it does is it samples where's the object here, and then in the next frame it's over here, where's the object here, and it draws a straight line through it. Right? So if it's on a curved path from one frame to the next, what you have to do is you have to add in samples, usually like 5 or so, and that'll get you a curved motion blur. Okay? So if you want to turn that on, go ahead. Your render times are going to jack up every time something moves really fast and it has to blur. So your render times will start getting really slow. This is where your render times won't match up all the way through. So if you turn this on, just know that's going to happen. If you want shorter motion blur, turn down the shutter angle. You have an shutter open in and a shutter close start. So in and start. So when does the shutter open? When does it close? Beginning of the frame is 0, end of the frame is 1. If I want it half the shutter speed, I can do, if I want a faster shutter, I can do, sorry, let's do that, 0.5. What'll happen is I'll only get motion blur from the time the shutter opens to halfway through the frame, and it'll blur and then it shuts off. And some cameras work that way. Like they won't, the camera shutter isn't open and close for one full frame unless you're on a film camera. Digital cameras, you'll get like half frame motion blurs and things like that because it's digital. So it's however much it grabs in a certain amount of time before it writes the file. So, but this is to simulate film. If you want to simulate actual film, it's 0 to 1. 180 degrees, 24 frames a second. That's what a film camera would do. But I shot it digitally, so that's why my motion blur doesn't quite match up. All right. Anything else? Anybody have any questions or anything? Everybody's mics are active, so if you unmute yourself, you can talk. Everybody's saying nothing. Okay. Well, if nobody else has anything, we can end it here. If anybody has any questions, shoot me an email. If now I did have one thing I wanted to ask, and so anybody who's listening to this lecture now who wasn't here live, if you needed to, like, because I gave everybody an extra week because it was kind of like rigging's kind of new. There were some of these rigs. There was a few rigs that were pretty rough, and so if you needed to clean them up and send them to me, some people tried to email me directly, and there is a 10 meg file limit on attachments. And what will happen is you'll email it and you'll think it's gone, which it has. It just never got to me. It hit our mail server, and it's like, nope, that's too big. And it should have sent a rejection back to you, saying the attachment was too big. But I think that goes and lands in some people's trash or something like that, and they don't see the rejection come back. So you might need to go look at your spam folder or something and see if the rejections are landing there, because it happens so much. It, like, suddenly now it's considered spam, and so it goes in the spam folder. And like I'll never see it. So I kind of found out this was happening because somebody asked me a question about the file they sent me, and I'm like, "What file?" Like, I didn't get anything, and I was digging through my mail. There was a couple other emails I read that was like they had sent me something before, and they're asking why I hadn't responded, and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never heard anything. If you tried to email me your rig, uh, what I need you to do is actually just go to the milestone. The grade's already in; it's kind of closed, but you can still get feedback. Just in feedback, you can upload a file. So you can just upload your file and email me and say, "Hey, I fixed my rig. It's up there. Can you go in and have a look?" And I'll regrade it based on that. But because I was having so much trouble with people trying to send me files, I'll give you guys a little leeway, but don't sit and try and fix your rig this week and then think you're going to render everything this weekend. Just kind of run with what you got. Right? Cool. All right. If nobody has any other questions, we'll go ahead and in the thing here. Kind of a smaller group, and had 14 people registered, but I only see 7. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure thing. All right. I'll see y'all later. Have fun rendering.